For those of you who heard Dr. Pena's speech last night, or heard one of the many panelists today, you'll likely recognize the humble and important work people are doing in their communities. President Hellman is also doing important work in Western's community. I met with Dr. Hellman, President Hellman, last week to gain insight into his accomplishments during his presidency. Particularly in light of this year's Headwaters theme, redefining prosperity, transitioning to the triple bottom line. And quite frankly, he really wasn't that helpful. Now, for you students out there, for people who have bosses, I don't suggest saying this sort of thing when your boss is in hearing distance. But what I mean by this is that President Hellman is incredibly humble, and he didn't want to take credit from anyone who had a vision or made something happen on campus. He wanted that credit to go to those people. But what he offers is he's the leader of our community, wherein people are leaders. They're encouraged to be leaders, and wherein we're all part of a community. He's created an atmosphere that encourages us, that inspires us, that supports us. So while he isn't willing to talk about his accomplishments at Western State during his presidential tenure, I will. In 2005, he supported the environmental charter, which was created by students. It went through the Student Government Association, it went through Faculty Senate, President Hellman signed it, and then ushered into the Board of Directors. In 2007, he signed the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, which pledged to reduce Western's carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. Now, we're not quite into winter yet, but all of you probably have some experience in Gunnison in the winter. It's really cold, and we're really far removed from the rest of the world. So you can imagine what a monumental commitment this is to cut Western's carbon emissions by 80% in 41 years. In 2009, he formed the Sustainability Action Committee, which has administrative, faculty, and student representation, and is charged with advancing sustainability initiatives on campus. When the new Student Center is finished, it will be the third LEED certified building on our campus, and we have a pretty small campus. One of those buildings is the Business and Administration, and the other one houses the Center for Environmental Studies. Now, these two disciplines, one might think, are really on either ends of an environmental or sustainability spectrum, but we have both here on campus, and a lot of that is thanks to President Hellman. During his time, the 6 years, the full-time female faculty has increased 4%. Again, if you're from Gunnison, you understand what sort of feat this is. He's worked to bring faculty salaries up to national average, and he's improved the fiscal stability of the college. Now, these are just a few of President Hellman's accomplishments. Some of his characteristics that have contributed to Western's prosperity are his vision, his humility, and the value he places on community. Please help me welcome President Hellman.
Thank you, Brooke. I'd like to start by thanking Brooke Moran and, whoops, Devin, you had trouble with this last night too, didn't you? I shouldn't have a distance problem, right? So I'd like to thank Brooke and John Hausdorfer for the remarkable job they've done in organizing this conference and for the stimulating dialogue that we've already had beginning last night and through today and on into this evening. I'd also like to thank them for this magnificent opportunity they've given me to both welcome and introduce Dr. Vandana Shiva, our speaker this evening. And I'd just like to start in this introduction by saying that I was reminded a few days ago that many years ago I read that one of the quickest routes to enlightenment is relationship with an enlightened person. And although I don't pretend to know Dr. Shiva, I just met her briefly out in the lobby, I did take time this week to read one of her books, Earth Democracy. And within 20 pages of reading in her book, I realized I was in the presence of a very enlightened person, and it was having a transformative effect on me probably before the end of the first chapter. It kind of goes like this. Because very quickly I realized that the lens through which I see the world was beginning to change, and I think that is a powerful transformative characteristic. Early in the book I learned that something that Devin Pena mentioned this morning, that economy and ecology come from the same Greek root, which is home or household, and I made a little note. It was Hausdorfer's book, so John, excuse me. I made a little note in the margin that I wrote household and home, and then I wrote a little question. How did the house become divided? And so with that question in mind, I read on, and not surprisingly, I turned the page and read the section about the three economies. And one of those three economies, of course, is the market economy. And Dr. Shiva suggests in the book that when the market economy becomes the highest organizing principle of the economy, then it trumps the others, and in many ways, I think she suggests that principle then creates kind of the house divided of a lot of things, including ecology and economy. This had such an amazing effect on me, some of it pretty profound, some of it almost humorous. One example was that night after that epiphany, my wife Dawn was out of town, so I was downstairs doing a little channel surfing on television and came across, it's not that I don't channel surf if Dawn's home, it's just that I had a certain amount of freedom with her being gone. So I'm hitting the buttons, like guys do. And I come across, it was a Tuesday night, I came across a college football game, checked it out for just a few seconds. They broke for a commercial break, and the network announced that, and this is what shocked me. So it's Tuesday night, and as they're breaking away from Saturday night college football. And I sat there and stared at it, and I thought, Saturday night college football on Tuesday, this is an example of the market economy trumping everything else. Now, what sort of an impact did that have on nature economy and sustenance economy? I don't know. Beyond bleary-eyed college students on Wednesday morning and the magic of transforming a Tuesday into a Saturday, heavens knows. But it was, for me, it was a profound moment, though, mundane from the standpoint of just sitting and watching television. Brooke Moran asked me a question, and this is one of the things I wasn't very cooperative about with Brooke. She asked me if I could share my personal view of prosperity, and I sat and stared at her for a second, and I said, Brooke, I'm going to have to think about that. So Brooke, I'd like to take a stab at it now. And my evolving personal sense of prosperity has been profoundly influenced by Dr. Shiva's work and certainly by Dr. Pena last night. I had 3 events in the last couple of days that I'd like to just briefly share with you to illustrate the transforming way that I'm thinking about prosperity. One of the events was a faculty event called the Center for Teaching Excellence. There was a workshop on Thursday at noon. And in that workshop, we had 12 faculty members from 12 different academic disciplines who were discussing writing across the curriculum, or how do we best deliver writing for our students. The presentation was given by an economist, and in the audience we had an anthropologist, we had chemists, we had a physicist, an English professor. I mean, it was across the board. The discussion fascinated me because they were talking about how do we best teach writing and communication? And I thought, my goodness, we've got 12 people from 12 disciplines all in this room talking about this really important, learning skill. Well, I walked out of the room pretty energized, but that didn't surprise me because I thought, well, I get more energized about learning than I do about thinking about the college budget and things like that. So it didn't surprise me, but how does it play back into prosperity? Dr. Pena's presentation last night hit me right between the eyes. He had a slide up here. For those of you that were here last night, you remember he showed a group of people working together I believe it was in a ditch, right? And he described how different people were bringing different skills into this community-based project, and this wonderful sense of community and helping to grow corn, etc. And I thought, well, that's what that CTE That's what that was all about. That was 12 people coming from 12 different areas to talk about one common thread that is really important, and that is, how do we teach and elicit, writing skills from our students? So there was a communal aspect to that, and the theme to me is relationship. So that, okay, the CTE event, then there was a pie throwing event. I came out of the president's house the other night to walk over to an event across campus, and I saw a whole bunch of students out in front of our Keating dining hall, and from a distance I could see that some of them were completely covered in white, and I couldn't tell if they'd been doing some body painting or what from a distance. And as I got closer, a couple of them looked at me, and one kid said, "Hey Jay, what's going on?" I looked at him and I said, "Man, what's going on with you?" And I realized then that he was covered with like cream. And he said to me, he said, "Well, we're doing throw a pie at your RA night." And for those of you not familiar with the terminology, an RA is a resident advisor in our residence halls. And so the RAs were out there getting pies thrown at them from the residents, because, of course, the RAs are the, they're the ones that not only counsel but do the busts, etc. So they were giving in this. So in this community, this residence community, they were creating an opportunity for the residents to blast them with cream pies. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful relationship. What a wonderful community. And then the third event that kind of influenced my sense of prosperity was about 48 hours ago, about 5:30 on Thursday. I was out for a run out here on this dirt road that runs out here by the airport, many of you know. And as I was coming back in, I mean, some of you know that I experienced a pretty serious medical setback this year. Well, the combination of the exhilaration of running out there, the sun was setting, the colors were beautiful, and I mean, I was like a kid. I was so overjoyed, and I was feeling good. I started doing a little Zorba dance, and I was all by myself, and I kept thinking, my God, if anybody saw me doing this. But I had this unmistakable feeling that something or someone was watching me, and I turned around, and there was this cow just staring at me. So the cow is staring at me, and I'm staring at the cow. The colors are soft. It's almost sundown, and at that moment, looking that cow right in the eye, it occurred to me in this context of relationship and prosperity, I thought, man, this is it. This is all about relationship. It's all about relationship to place, to people, to the wonder of life. And so with that, Brooke, I hope I've answered my question about prosperity. It's relationship, it's community, it's play, in my view, it's place, it's a whole lot of those things. So with all that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Vandana Shiva, our speaker this evening. Dr. Shiva.
I'd like to go to a college with a president like that. Yes. Thank you very much. And thank you, Brooke, and thank you to the team of Headwaters for putting this together. Devin and I were remembering that my first trip to this region, and I was introduced to Headwaters, oh, the podium is moving. We're talking about movements. Was in 1995. And of course, I've been inspired a lot by the work here. I see a lot of connection with what we do at home. Of course, I'd like to build a connection with greeting you with Happy Diwali. Tonight is the Festival of Lights. And we light lamps to invite the goddess of prosperity. She's called Lakshmi. And you can only invite her if you live the good life. Not through greed, not through exploitation, but through an economy of sharing and of giving, the issue of relationships that Jay just raised. And the day following the lighting of lamps. And interestingly, you know, my mother explained to me when we were little children, because we put mustard oil in these earthen lamps. And this is the time when the season is changing. There's lots and lots of insects and pests. And mustard is an insecticide and fungicide. And by lighting these lamps, and hundreds of lamps are lit in homes, you're actually cleaning up the atmosphere without spraying poison. You're making your life beautiful because you share good food, wonderful sweets are eaten at Diwali. And you're celebrating authentic prosperity. But what I love is the day following, which is called Gobardhan Puja. Now, Go is the cow that you saw, Jay. Gobar is the cow's gifts. Dhan is as wealth. A whole day is dedicated to celebrating cow pat as wealth and prosperity. And that's because if you miss out on that link of what the animals do for us in terms of returning soil fertility, especially in arid areas, because in very wet zones, especially wet and humid zones, the cycle of biodegradation can happen fast. But in dry zones, without the animals helping us with recycling of organic matter, it's not that easy. So if you notice, the deserts of the world have the highest livestock. The deserts of the world are the richest pastoral economies. So what is prosperity? It's different for every place because this planet is so diverse. The expressions of the earth to share her prosperity with us are so diverse. I remember last year, you know, this GMO question doesn't go away, genetic engineering. And of course, there's always someone who thinks that without Roundup-resistant soya and Bt toxic corn, the world won't be fed. And first I have to always remind them that no one person feeds the world. In every home, there's some caring person who's cooking that day. It used to be just mothers, but I think it's changing a little. And part of what we are trying to do is get young people to recognize that they can be creative artists in the kitchen. So this person trying to justify GMOs said, "But how do you think the people in Greenland will be fed?" And I had to explain to him that people in Greenland are fed by the sea, not by the land. It's an ocean-based food system. And this monoculture of the mind that I have described assumes every place has to look the same, every place has to produce the same things, and every community and culture has to eat the same junk, whether it's a bottle of Coca-Cola. I actually get repulsions, physical repulsion, when I, go into a hotel, like I checked in this afternoon, and everywhere you have to go past a Coca-Cola dispenser. Everywhere. It's no wonder that it's been called Coca-Colonization. And thirst is so basic to life, and quenching thirst is also so basic to life. And can you imagine thirst has been colonized? You can't quench your thirst with that horrible red sign. I've never liked the taste of Coke, but it was in 2002 that for me it became an absolute ethical duty to say no to Coke, whether it was as a soda or it was as water in a bottle of Kinley. And that's why I'm so grateful that you brought me water. So often they'll put a Aquafina or a Kinley on the desk and I can't drink it, I go thirsty, because I took a pledge in 2002. And I took the pledge because this false sense of prosperity, everyone drinking Coke as one model of prosperity, had allowed Coca-Cola to return to India. 1977, Coca-Cola had been thrown out of India. I don't think it has been thrown out of any country before. It was thrown out for financial irregularities, as was IBM. Two companies that were caught messing up their accounts. And 1977, we just had a new government. The emergency that Indira Gandhi had created had just ended, so there was this deep sense of a country that was free and sovereign and could make their decisions. So Coca-Cola was out in 77. They came back as a consequence of the so-called free trade agreements, that you can't now block a corporation from investing. And the WTO opened the doors for Coke to return. 2002, I was invited by a tiny village, and I like to go to tiny places. That's why I'm here. I didn't know the community, little village called Plachimada in the state of Kerala in South India. And I just had a phone call to say, we are celebrating 1 year of protesting against Coke. And can you join us for the celebration? So I found out how I reached this place, just as I had to find out how I reached this place. And Brooke gave me a heart attack when she was looking at the other end of the airport and I was standing at the other end. I went out, no taxis. I said, if Brooke doesn't come, I'm stuck. And that's how I felt about going to Plachimada. But they were there to greet me at the airport that was 3 hours away. And I reached about 6 p.m. There was a tiny little makeshift stage that had been created. My Lama, the woman who had started the movement, was there with a bow and arrow because they are tribals to greet me. There were about 50 women, some children, some men, and 500 policemen. So of course I shared the evening with them and also realized that this is typical of a place where, before you know it, these women will be hauled up, thrown into jail, no one will ever come to know. And I started to build support for their movement. Political support by getting the representatives of local bodies and asking them to come in legally. I've just been told by Devon that there's been major legal victories around the commons in Colorado. The women's action in Plachimada was triggered because Coca-Cola was mining 1.5 million liters of water per day. Now that's an average extraction in any plant of Coca-Cola, 1.5 to 2 million liters. They don't function like women carrying one little pot on their head for the family. They have to deal in millions of liters. And the water table was going down, but what was worse, what little remained was getting polluted because they were dumping waste. And nobody still knows how they generate waste in the soft drink industry. But it's got heavy metals, it's got lead, it's got carcinogenic metals, it's got phosphoric acid. Where does all this come from? It's a trade secret, nobody really knows. We don't know what we drink when we drink Coca-Cola. That's also a trade secret. So the women were having to walk further and further for water. That was not prosperity. And I have found over my many, many years, 35 years now, that 10 miles is the limit. You know, women will walk 1 mile, they'll walk 2 miles, they'll walk 5 miles, they'll walk 10 miles. And at 10 miles, they say, no more. The destruction must stop. That's what happened with the Chipko movement, the beautiful movement to stop logging in my region in the mountains. That's what happened with aquaculture, and I'll tell you about how that too was not prosperity. And that's what happened with the Coca-Cola issue. 10 miles, women said, all we are doing is walking for water. This company must shut down. So they sat in front of the gate. And we built the support, also helped support legal cases, and a High Court ruling of Kerala High Court said, Justice Balakrishna Nair was the name of the judge. He said, water is a commons, it belongs to the community, it's vital for their sustenance. Neither a commercial interest nor the state has the right to appropriate this water as a commons. Of course, Coca-Cola wasn't going to let this pass. They've challenged it in the Supreme Court, but I don't think they're going to get away with it. They're also challenging the government's actions. But meantime, the people's actions have not allowed them to open their gates. Since 2004, they've had to shut that plant. And inspired by that, 4 other plants of Coca-Cola have shut down. Now, the difference in 1977 was the government took the action. In this time, it's the people taking the action because the governments are inactive. And they're inactive because an inevitable consequence of globalization, of corporate globalization, is states mutate. States are no more public states. They become corporate states. And democracy, which was of the people, by the people, for the people, now becomes of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations. And that, of course, in my view, is the death of democracy. You might get one government for a short time that doesn't go along, and all the money is put to mobilize a replacement. But by and large, what we can see doesn't matter. In England, it doesn't matter whether it's Labour or the Conservatives. In core issues of food and water, decisions don't change. In the US, genetic engineering decisions haven't really changed, with the dramatic change in government that you have seen. But a famous man called Michael Taylor, who, knowing that recombinant bovine growth hormone had huge impact on cows and huge impact on human health, hid that data and got the approval. He was also the one who, when states like Vermont passed labeling laws, said no state could make its own standards on food issues. Only Washington could. When he was out for a little while, he's right back in power. I can't remember the exact position he has, but he's right there. And food is an issue of everyday life. And I would define prosperity in food in terms of how prosperous our farms are, how fertile our soil is, how rich our biodiversity is, how well our pollinators are, how the water that helps us grow food is shared and is equal, how the food that's produced reaches everybody, and we celebrate food as an amazing gift. We celebrate food as the gift of the earth firm, and we celebrate it as the future transformation into our body. But the industrial system of food has, of course, separated us from food as if it's just a product, just a commodity we have to stuff in. And it has separated the commodity from the context which produces it. So much has been spoken about, written about in terms of the Green Revolution as a miracle that took India from starvation. I was old enough in '65 to know India wasn't starving. All that had happened is we'd had a drought, and any drought means a reduction in production. And India wanted to import a little more wheat to manage the prices, because it was more the impact on prices than starvation. By then, by 65, Norman Borlaug had worked out how to re-engineer plants to allow them to take up more chemicals. This had been a problem because indigenous crops refuse chemicals. They do a civil disobedience. They just lie down and lodge. Don't want you. So lodging was a very big problem because, the main reason the Green Revolution was spread was to sell more chemicals. They were looking for markets on how to spread chemicals. But the plants were saying no. So they had to re-engineer the plant into these dwarf varieties. And the dwarf varieties then are called the miracle varieties. Did they give us more food? No. Because now you had to grow food in monocultures, whereas earlier we grew food in mixtures. And per acre we used to produce more food. And we used to produce more food per acre without any external input. You got your nitrogen from your legumes and nitrogen-fixing plants. You recycled your cow dung into compost. You didn't need chemical fertilizers. You didn't need pesticides because those mixtures are the best way to control pests. Biodiversity is the best antidote to pest resurgence of any kind. Mixtures take less water and they produce more nutrition per acre. But everything was reoriented to say we are now producing more food. The other day, I was having a debate on radio with the person who heads the Borlaug Foundation. Norman Borlaug passed away, I think, about a month ago. So everyone was writing about him, everyone was talking about him. And the person who heads the foundation rattled off these figures of how India's wheat production and rice production went from this million acres to this million acres, all because of the seeds. They never talk about the chemicals. It's always about the miracle seeds. And I just had to turn around and say, but what about the acreage? How much acreage went under rice and wheat? And all you have to do is the sums of increased acreage under rice, increased acreage under wheat, more water applied for irrigation, you'd get the same amount of increase in rice and wheat production with organic methods and native seeds. So the narrative of prosperity is manipulated in order to be able to sell a model of prosperity. Now, the chemical model, the toxic model of prosperity has, of course, come out from the wars. Every agri-chemical had its birth in chemical warfare. That's where the herbicides, Agent Orange, sprayed on Vietnam, pesticides used, DDT was used to handle ticks and fleas on soldiers, and nitrogen fertilizers came out of the factories that earlier used to make explosives. So after the war, the industry could have and should have folded up. Rachel Carson has reminded us so powerfully about it, that an industry that had got used to making profits during the war. And the second person who's reminded us about this is Sir Albert Howard, who's often called the father of modern organic farming. He was sent to India in 1905 as the imperial agricultural scientist. They didn't have the word agriculture then, so they used to call them economic botanists, because before that botany was about the study of plants. Now botany was about commerce. So he was sent to improve Indian agriculture. And he says, I arrived and I found the soils were fertile, there were no pests in the fields. I threw away my spray guns. I decided to turn the pest and the peasant into my teachers on how to do good farming. Out of that, he then wrote the book called The Agricultural Testament, which is the principles of organic farming that have then spread worldwide. He knew that chemicals were being spread by a war industry. The war industry used amazing advertising. I've seen some of those advertisements. When you were using cow dung, it was called dirt. It was black and it has smell. Urea, little pellets of urea, white and clean. Of course, toxic, but who cares? These days, clean is toxic and ecological is dirty. I'm saving a potato chip packet. I'm going to take it home because we are having these horrible new laws inspired by the US on making food untouched by hand. And you know, India is a land with lots of hands. And India is also a land with very good food made by hand. But as was the case here, as was the case in Europe, these pseudo-hygiene laws are introduced to industrialize processing or slaughter or whatever, including chip making. So Pepsi now sells the largest number of packets of chips in India. Till 10 years ago, every region you went, every village you went, every town you went would have 50 different producers of chips, usually women's collectives. Wonderful chips, crisp and nice. Now Pepsi has a monopoly, Lay's. Most people don't know Lay's is Pepsi. About 4 years ago, our farmers growing potato were in deep crisis. So I did a quick survey, found out they were spending 300 rupees for 100 kilograms of potato as the cost of production, and then they were selling it between 20 to 30 rupees. 10 times more cost of production. Obviously they couldn't make ends meet, and no matter how much you grew, the negative economy just became more negative. But the false narrative of prosperity says, the problem for you is you're too small. Become bigger and you'll be fine. One negative added to a second negative added to a third negative is lots of negatives. It doesn't become a positive. I then did a calculation. Pepsi's chips sell for 10 rupees a package, about 200 grams. 0.08 paisa was what the farmer was getting for that packet of chips. So Pepsi's prosperity is based on the farmers losing their prosperity, on nature losing her diversity. Hundreds of potatoes the world used to have. Now the favorite is this crazy russet Burbank. 1,500 cotton varieties India used to have. India domesticated cotton. India got independence, spinning cotton. You know, Gandhi pulled out the spinning wheel and said, we won't fight the British with guns. We will deal with them by every one of us becoming empowered to be producers. So we do not have to depend on the empire. Because as you know, the empire had reorganized clothing and textiles. The British had come to India for spices and our really high quality textiles. And they'd come as East India Company, the first company, 1600. And then they stayed on, of course. They came as traders, established military bases, exactly as what happened here. And then started to change the rules. They wrote a free trade agreement in 1716. It's called a free trade agreement between the Right Honorable East India Company and the last crumbling Mughal emperor of that time. And the treaty said exactly what today's WTO agreements say. Local will be taxed, international traders will not be taxed. They'll have a tax holiday. Local will have no subsidy. Global traders will have huge subsidies. So at every level, whether it's subsidy structures or tax structures or incentive structures, the giant global players win out and local producers and local businesses lose out. It's designed to work that way. The globalization of the textile industry at that time was connected very much to fossil fuels. It was connected to colonization. It couldn't have worked without taking Africans to be slaves on the cotton plantations in this country. It wouldn't have worked without compulsory growing of indigo in India under a slavery system. And that's why one of the first movements that Gandhi came back to when he returned from South Africa was a movement to stop indigo cultivation. It was called the Indigo Satyagraha. Satya means truth, Agraha means the passion, the force of truth. To basically say, we would rather die than grow indigo, which is killing us anyway. And that was the first major use of peaceful non-resistance to shift imperial policy. Then, of course, Gandhi turned to the charkha, the spinning wheel. We brought our textiles back, brought back the capacity. The weavers were spinning again. The British even used to cut off the thumbs of the best weavers so they couldn't teach the next generation. The master weavers had their thumbs lost. I see patents as doing a very similar job. Much more brutal because now it's about life. I started Navdanya, the movement for seed saving and organic farming and protection of farmers' rights in 1987 because I was invited to a meeting where these giant companies were there, and they talked about how there'd be 5 of them by the turn of the century, and the instruments that the successful 5 would use would be genetic engineering, patenting of life, and free trade agreements. And I heard this, and I said, this is a dictatorship. And it's not just a dictatorship over a particular country, it's a global dictatorship. It's not just a global dictatorship over human beings, it's a planetary dictatorship, turning all of life in all its richness and diversity into slave forms. Either dispensable, if you're not useful to me, you go to extinction, or manipulable. Genetic engineering was necessary because without it, the patent issue couldn't have started. The first patent on life was granted to General Electric in 1980 for mixing bacteria, 4 bacteria species into one through these techniques of gene splicing that had been worked out in the 70s in the public domain in universities. And the founders of gene splicing had held a meeting in Asilomar in 1972 to say, this technology is playing with life, we don't know the consequences. We will therefore not go further with this till we understand what it means for ecology, what it means for health. So the founders put a stop to it, but then the corporations who had made toxics in the Green Revolution now said, here's another way to make profits, and now we can own the seed as our intellectual property. And an intellectual property means, first, product of the mind. Devon, have you ever seen a corn seed pop out of a Monsanto head? There isn't a Monsanto head. I mean, Monsanto doesn't have a head. It's a legal fiction. It has a legal personality assigned to it, but it's a little piece of paper. It's a text on a piece of paper. It's not a person as real person. So how on earth can it have a mind? And how on earth can there have property in products of the mind? For me, this is the worst of enclosures of the commons. Because life is a commons. The knowledge in every seed is a commons. It's come to us from centuries of sharing and evolution. And now you have the system of patenting seed. Seed patents make it illegal for farmers to save seeds, make it illegal for farmers to exchange seeds. If genetically engineered seed contaminates your field, the farmer who's a victim of pollution is now treated as a thief, as happened in the case with a very famous case in Canada called Percy Spicer, and less known cases in this country. 1,400 farmers have been sued after they've been polluted. And Monsanto's been on record to say, if pollution is the way we spread the inevitability of genetically engineered patented seed, that's what we are going to spread. So it's not happening by accident. Nor have patents come by accident. Monsanto went on record 1995 when the WTO came into force to say that in shaping the intellectual property rights agreement, which is called the Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights Agreement, and it's called trade-related because it wasn't trade-related. Before that, different countries made their own patent laws. according to their needs. And in India, we did not allow patents on agriculture, and we did not allow patents on medicine except the method of making a medicine. It's called a process patent. That's how we could produce affordable drugs. The companies, of course, would like every Indian patient to spend 100 times more so that their prosperity grows. A patent on seed is corporate prosperity at the cost of life on earth. Patents on medicine are corporate prosperity at the cost of those who need healing. And in India, we have seen this very dramatically. Monsanto came in with BT cotton, in 1997 and put huge ads in the newspaper saying now Indian farmers would have Bolgard seed. It's called Bolgard because it's supposed to protect the plant from bollworm. I saw this, I immediately checked with the government. Have they gone through this law and this law and this law? And of course nobody had been approached because they've got used to deregulation in this country. And there's a very strange deregulation which was put in place by Dan Quayle. I always remember him as the vice president who couldn't spell potato. After Rio at the Earth Summit, when we managed to get a convention on biological diversity into place, the senior Bush administration said we are not going to allow our biotech industry to be touched by any international regulation for safety. That's all it was about, safety. And Dan Quayle passed an order which is called substantial equivalence. Treat a genetically engineered organism or food as equal to the non-genetically engineered organism or food. You never have to therefore look, and because you don't look, you don't find, and therefore you have no studies on risk, and therefore the Americans are always told, but it's safe. It's safe because it's never been studied for safety. And then the US example is used to try and force this on the rest of the world. We're still fighting. But in the case of cotton, I managed to delay the introduction by 4 years through a Supreme Court case. After 2002, we started to sell commercially. The seed cost went up from 7 rupees to 1,750 rupees overnight. The 7 rupee seed could be saved every year, year in and year out. The 1,700 rupee seed had to be bought every year. It's supposed to be about controlling pests. Instead, it has increased new pests, and it has increased the resistance in the bollworm. 13 times increase in pesticide use is what we found. Between the seed cost and the pesticide cost and the fertilizer cost and the irrigation cost, farmers who never actually had that money were just putting their thumbprints when the agents of the companies came and said, here's a miracle seed, adopt it, and would show a wonderful video with gods and goddesses and how the seeds were coming right from the skies. The farmers would believe it and get the seeds. And meantime, the companies have a system of what they call seed replacement. They take away your seed, so you can never turn back. If you have a crop failure, you can never turn back. As a result of this combination of factors, in the last decade, India has had 200,000 farmers' suicides. Now, this was all supposed to be for prosperity. So I now always ask, whose prosperity? We have, I think we have 4 billionaires in the top 10 list of Forbes. I think the Financial Times has a story today about Mukesh Ambani, who's building a 27-story house. 7 of the floors are just parking space. I think he's the 4th or 5th richest man in the world. Controls all the petrochemicals, all the gas, just controls large chunks of the economy. He's become richer. His prosperity has grown, but it's grown at the cost of others. It's grown at the cost of the farmers whose land he takes away to make his petrochemical plants double up in capacity. He's building the biggest petrochemical plant in the world today. Farmers lose out when their land is taken for special economic zones. Poor people lose out as an economy driven by the interests of the big players starts to dismantle the economy of the small players. So we have, for the first time in the history of independent India, we now have the highest number of hungry people in the world. More people who are hungry in India than in Africa. India has become the capital of hunger in the same period of prosperity. Because the prosperity was measured 9% growth. Now 9% growth is not prosperity because it accrues to some people, but worse, it measures the wrong thing. If I cut down a forest, I'm contributing to growth. That's why when the women of Chipko came out and said we hug the trees, they were accused of blocking growth. They said you're anti-national, you're blocking growth. If I spray pesticides and make the bees disappear, I'm contributing to growth. Because the bees don't count, the farmers don't count, the soil doesn't count, the trees don't count, the rivers don't count, the water doesn't count. Gross domestic product and gross national product are measured by one single definition. If you produce what you consume, you don't produce. That's why women don't work, subsistence peasants don't produce food, and small-scale businesses who serve the community and are based on relationships, they don't contribute to growth. But things are changing. President Sarkozy of France appointed a commission with Joseph Stiglitz, who's a Nobel Prize winner and is a professor at Columbia University, and Amartya Sen, who is another Nobel Prize winner. The Stiglitz Commission was asked to look at the measurement of prosperity and well-being of people. And is GNP and GDP an adequate indicator? He said no. The whole commission has come out with the fact it's a totally inappropriate indicator. GDP could be growing, but people could be becoming poorer. GDP could be growing, but people's prosperity could be coming down. And then now you have a new Nobel Prize in economics to a non-economist, and a woman at that. Professor Ahlstrom of Indiana University just got the Nobel Prize of Economics for her work on the commons. This is absolutely radical and revolutionary. I remember when I wrote Staying Alive, my last bit, I asked the publisher to send my manuscript back. I said, I have to add a last bit, because a Nobel Prize in Economics was announced to Robert Solow. And Solow said, there's nothing like an ecological crisis. For every resource we deplete, technology will help us create a substitute. There'll never be an ecological crisis. We'll never run out of water. The bees can have colony collapse disorder. We'll just manufacture new ones. And to know that 20 years down the line, it's recognized that commons and community are the foundation of economy. They're also the foundation of human well-being. They're the foundation of sustenance. I see the world, as the President mentioned, as the base is nature's economy. She works much harder than any of us do. I mean, if we just took the work of the pollinators, the seed industry would be put to shame as insignificant. If we were to just reflect on the hydrological cycle, all the water corporations and Coca-Cola would look trivial in terms of cleaning up, recycling, moving water and getting it to us. All of this amazing work of nature produces goods and services. And an economy based on a false concept of prosperity, linked to the destruction of democracy, is destroying nature's economy. An economy that ignores people and nature is also destroying both the community economies, the people's economies, the sustenance economies that provide the real stuff that keeps us going. I mean, so many studies by feminist economists have shown that most of the work done is outside the market. You know, just in terms of energies we give to each other. And the market economy itself, there's a real market economy of goods and services, but as you know, last year when the bubble burst, there was a bubble economy that was 70 times bigger than the real economy and had created such an illusionary prosperity, of course, huge prosperity for the bankers, who each of them could have probably 20 yachts, 30 villas, and whatever else you can buy with money beyond your need. I love a book that's called Richistan. Yeah? I don't know how many of you read it. Richistan, the land where the rich live. And they don't live where the rest of us live. And all of them, it doesn't matter, they could be Chinese billionaires, Indian billionaires, Malaysian billionaires, American billionaires, they all live in the same way. They need big houses, many of them, they need yachts, and they need private airplanes. They can't survive without it. It's such a basic need. And for the rest of us, we are constantly told, we will make money ripping off the earth and ripping you off. Your duty is to be a consumer and quietly, obediently take what we bring to you. Consumption has become our main identity, our main activity. But in the Middle Ages, consumption used to be consumption used to refer to TB. You died of TB in the Middle Ages because there were no treatments. He died of consumption. And I think we could still say that. We could still say that at a planetary scale. You know, the poor planet is dying of consumption with all the fossil fuel use. I mean, in a way, one could see greenhouse gases as a consumption. That's killing us. And, you know, of all people, Dr. Robin Williams, the head of the Anglican Church in England, just gave a speech the other day in which he said, humanity is faced by being choked, drowned, or starved by its own stupidity. This is the chief of the Church of England. Not just radical students. He is recognizing that we have reached the ultimate in stupidity. And stupidity cannot be prosperity. We therefore have to make a shift. And I have called that shift the building of Earth democracy. The first aspect of it is to recognize that we are Earth citizens. We're not citizens of a supermarket. We're citizens of the Earth. And with that citizenship comes duties, responsibilities, sharing, community. And of course, Earth citizenship is based on the commons, because the Earth's lives, the many billion, 300 million species, 6 billion people, all of those lives are based on managing the commons and maintaining community. You cannot maintain community by taking too much from someone else, either another species or another community somewhere far away, or the future generations. We have wonderful text, ancient text that says, if you take more than you need, you are stealing, because you're taking away someone's share, either the share of other beings or the share of future generations, because as Native Americans have known so well, you've got to measure your prosperity on the basis of the prosperity of the 7th generation. If they will stay prosperous, then your prosperity is authentic. If their prosperity is depleted, then yours is a false prosperity. It's an unethical and immoral prosperity. Now, to reduce our ecological footprint means building more local economies. It's as simple as that. We have to do it because we have to get out of climate change, and I want to congratulate the President. We need to send that message to the White House and the Congress. They're only talking about 4% reduction. Not enough. So we have to make the shift if we have to deal with the climate havoc that is being caused. And people are dying today. I'm working with communities on the impact of climate change. In the Himalaya, we're getting flash floods. Instead of snow, we're getting too much rain. We are getting drought on a very large scale this year. Half of India's food production has been destroyed. Cyclones are increasing in frequency and intensity, and each cyclone takes 20,000 lives, 50,000 lives. Cyclone Nargis in Burma took 150,000 lives last year. So we are talking about climate havoc today, climate chaos today. I don't like to talk of climate change because it sounds too predictable and neat. What we are talking about is a total scrambling of the Earth's self-organized weather patterns. We also need to rebuild local economies because that's the only way these amazing limbs that were given to us can be put to use. Our hands have been wasted. And there's nothing more creative than the human hand. As long as we are only consumers, we are not creators and co-creators with nature. And I think the biggest revolution is the revolution of self-making, self-producing. We've been told it's hard work, but tell me any good work that is not hard work. Killing is easy. Destroying is quick. Planting a seed and having a harvest takes time. And I know as a mother, having a baby takes 9 long months. Time is what we don't have to be afraid of. There never was scarcity of it. For some reason, we've been made to think that time is scarce when we should be made to think water is scarce. We should be made to think energy is scarce. Time is not scarce. All of the fossil fuel use is about saving time. Yeah? You've got to have bigger machinery on the farm, throw out the farmers to save time. Put toxics into the food, put high fructose corn syrup. Why make good artisanal sugar? We make artisanal sugar. It's wonderful. Delicious. Doesn't give you diabetes either, and it's tastier. So we need to build local living economies to deal with the unemployment crisis, the financial crisis. The corporations won't generate jobs. 3% is all they can employ on this planet. They want to take all the food economy, they want to take all the water economy, they want to take the entire economy, but their possibility of generating work is for 3% of humanity. So what does the rest of 97% do? We'll have to build our own economies. And I think relocating production in the earth and in community is what we have to do. We have to celebrate it, not treat it as a burden. And all my work in agriculture, I am absolutely convinced that local economies, ecological systems are more productive systems. We've been we've had false measures. GDP was one false measure. Yield of single commodity is a second false measure. 10 times more inputs into farming systems than you get out of them. 10 times more feed as protein to animals in factory farms than you get out as protein. How can a loss of 90% of your scarce resources and energy, how can that destruction be counted as efficient? These definitions were wrong. They worked wonderfully for those for whom fossil fuels were available for cheap, for whom getting more control over the economy and finding bigger markets was the aim. Maximizing their profits, not the prosperity of all, was the agenda. Gandhi had a beautiful word for this, and it's called Swadeshi. Swa means self, emerging from the self. Deshi means of local resources. Economies based on local resources. And every part of the earth gives something, and not one thing, many things that can generate livelihoods and basic needs. But he also knew that you cannot have local living economies without living democracy and earth democracy. And the word he gave that was Swaraj, self-organized self-rule. That self-rule comes with responsibility. That self-rule needs building and organizing community. But at the end of it, what you have is freedom, which is the one thing that's slipping out of our hands so fast. that most people aren't even noticing. There is no separation anymore between freedom and democracy, ecological sustainability, social justice, and peace. They're all one piece. They're all integrated. And our challenge now is to localize our material footprint while we expand our planetary consciousness to the whole planet level. We don't have to go to the last corner of the earth to rape it and predate it. That doesn't turn us into global citizens. It turns us into global parasites. For being global earth citizens, we need a very tiny ecological space while we raise our consciousness to embrace all life on earth and even the universe. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. We do have about 15 minutes for questions. We have a microphone on this side and the other side, which will just need to be turned on. So please help yourselves.
Dr. Shiva, I wanted to ask you a question which Dr. Payne addressed a little this morning, but I just need some clarification. You talk on this quite often and its importance. In this country, we have set aside lands under various government agencies. Our forests, wilderness areas, our public lands, which are used for grazing and such. And yet, it doesn't seem that there's the care for the commons that you talk about. So perhaps you could talk about the difference between this American setting aside of lands and the commons as you speak of it.
The commons are supported by and they support community. Public lands, like national forests, are held in public trust, but they are managed by the state. So what is missing is the participation of community. And I think that's what's been missing in the discourse of the last century, because we were made to believe that we have only one choice between the market and communism. But one was about totalitarian states, and the other was about totalitarian corporations. We now need to seek freedom beyond both those into communities which then create accountable states and democratic governments and trim the power of corporations to appropriate size. What that appropriate size will be decided by community effort. If you can make your own bread, why do you need Cargill to get you the wheat? I've just defeated them in a huge Supreme Court case. They wanted to send contaminated, rotten wheat to India and were diluting our health standards. And we felt our bread should be made from the wheat our farmers grow at lower price and better quality. So where you really need corporations will come out of that discussion. Today the assumption is, even if we can do something for ourselves, it should be made illegal. If we can save seeds, we shouldn't be allowed to. If we can grow food, if we can have our meat. I was told slaughterhouses have disappeared in this area, which has created a huge crisis for local farmers. All of those are now subjects of recovery of the commons.
If you have a question, it would be great if you could just come on down to the microphone so we could use what time we have with Dr. Shiva.
First of all, Dr. Shiva, thank you so much for joining us. And it's an amazing opportunity just to be able to ask you these questions, so thank you for coming down today. My question revolves around, what can I do? What how do I manifest these ideas? Besides the fact that I'm now aware of these things that were brought up, constantly, not only through what you've written, but other things as well, how do I apply those ideas to reality? What are your suggestions for me to bring these ideas and manifest them in a real setting?
I don't like to give suggestions, but I can share my own practice and my own experience quickly. I think food is the place to begin in today's time. The reason it's vital to begin with food is, first and foremost, that's what's being colonized in a very serious way. And its colonization is, of course, taking away these fundamental freedoms of being able to choose the seed you grow, the food you eat, but it's costing lives. 1 billion people are severely hungry. More children are dying for lack of food today than they did 10 years ago. And then the 2 billion who are cursed with obesity and diabetes and life-threatening diseases because of being fed stuff that should never have got into our bodies. No matter where in the food chain you are, whether it's for public health, it's for ecology. I've just done my book, Soil Not Oil. 35 to 40% of greenhouse gas emissions are linked to globalized industrialized agriculture. So if you're passionate about climate change, the place to begin is food. If you're passionate about public health, the place to begin is food. If you're passionate about biodiversity, the place to begin is food. And if you're passionate about using your skills to be a wonderful cook, the place to begin is food. And the opportunities are limitless. So, that's why I dedicated myself to the issue of food. Food was an orphan of the environmental movement. It was also an orphan of the human rights movement. Nobody looked at it. It was too basic. The corporations were looking, but the rest of us said, let them take it. Because we were made to believe it's too trivial an issue. I think now's the time to reclaim it and find our full human potential through that reclaiming.
Dr. Shiva, you commented on the church leader of England getting it, being a radical and having that position. And I would like to hear just some more comment on this movement and awareness that you speak of and how that's flowing through spiritual communities in a way that they participate in this kind of blessed unrest that we are witnessing. And I don't hear that voice enough from our communities, and I would love to hear what you're hearing as you travel and encounter.
But when on this trip of mine to the States, one of the stops I'll make will be in New Orleans. The patriarch of the Orthodox Christian Church, about 10 years ago, decided to start holding symposiums on rivers and water bodies. And he put out this declaration that said pollution is sin, ecological destruction is sin. And that's where spiritual thinking will have to go. Of course, we have institutionalized religion that is more busy accumulating power. We've got fundamentalisms of every hue that would like to rule through fear. But each of us has a spiritual dimension. And my sense is, being with young people, just being in my own country, there is not just an ecological resurgence, there is a spiritual resurgence in people. People don't want to view themselves as purely material beings designed for merely material consumption. We have a higher life. And that higher life and higher consciousness is what spirituality is about. And I think the beauty about spirituality is it takes politics to another level. It allows you to begin acting at your level and in your community. Because other politics is always addressed to power, You do this. When I'm a spiritual being, I have the power to be the change I want to see, as Gandhi said. Then you don't have to wait. But the wonderful thing is, as you take those steps, then powerful interests are forced to follow too. If we hadn't started questioning the patenting of seed, it would be inevitable that all seed would be patented. Today, the commons is being celebrated even by the Nobel Peace Prize. So the small steps we take are not insignificant steps. And in any way, we were made limited. We were made people with limited capacity, one step at a time. We can't take giant steps. Thank goodness.
You mentioned earlier that you don't necessarily share ideas on how to do it, but Kirk and I in class had thought about the way corporations are and the infrastructure that is there, and just it seems kind of daunting. And how can we remove ourselves from the corporation in a way that I guess you could say the U.S. is, and go back to giving back to the commons and giving the commons back to the people?
Well, the first thing is never use the word back to the commons. It's always forward to the commons. And I think for U.S. citizens, it's very vital to recognize that it's in America the corporations established their total rule. But they're seeking rule over the rest of the world right now. So when you start to feel, oh my God, this is too big, you have to think in solidarity. You have to recognize that there's a huge movement of peasants out there, and half of humanity is still peasants. You have to remember that. And half of that humanity is saying, we will exercise food sovereignty. We will exercise seed sovereignty. So every time you feel I'm alone, just remember 3 billion people out there, and they already have strong movements, and your work is to keep them in your mind, sometimes to relate to them, sometimes to connect to them. And that's why for me, traveling for learning is vital in our times, because otherwise we won't even understand how the world was globalized, what it's doing to other people, and how our steps can be in solidarity with those who have been the worst victims. And for that reason, I've started a school on our ecological farm and biodiversity farm. And I call it the School of the Seed, because seed has been my inspiration. And we welcome people. We welcome people just, A, to figure out how you can farm without fossil fuels. So easy. How you can grow food without fertilizers. How you never have to spray a pesticide. You don't ever have to have plastic around you. It's possible. And then out of that come all kinds of opportunities of your thinking, in my area with this kind of soil, this kind of rainfall, this kind of community, these are the things I could be doing.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Shiva, very much for coming and enlightening all of us. As Jay said, you are an enlightened being, and you're spreading light wherever you go. But I wanted to return to your comment about the power of the human hand. That was very powerful for me. And what I noticed in my generation is this kind of all-prevailing apathy that seems to paralyze people into thinking they have no efficacy as a person, they don't have any way of changing things. And I just wanted to comment that your words are very empowering to me personally, that I, with my 2 hands, can make a huge difference by something as simple as feeding myself and my family. And I just wanted to say thank you for that.
I just want to share with you wonderful, I got an award some time ago along with Betty Williams, who got a Nobel Peace Prize for the Irish Peace. And, she carries a badge. Arms are meant for hugging. So it's not just hands, but the arms too, that are vital to not just be creative, but also to spread community.
Thank you so much for coming. I just had a question. I'm interested on your thoughts for places in Africa who are completely reliant on outside sources for food. I didn't know how we could help to empower those people, or what steps you thought needed to be taken to begin to localize their economy.
Well, the first thing is, we definitely need to stop Bill Gates from making sure the rest of Africa can't eat without buying fertilizers and toxic seed. He's scolded the environmental community. Environmentalists are coming in the way of progress and GMO seeds because of their concern with industrial farming and chemical agriculture. He wants to spread chemicals when everyone knows they're the worst piece of the problem in climate change. 40% of the emissions in agriculture are nitrogen oxide. And you know, I've just traveled my country in the drought. Every farm that has been fertilized chemically, they could not have a crop because there was not enough rain. But the organic farms that our farmers have and grow, they had a crop. So for Africa to be made dependent on synthetic fertilizers and GM seeds is a recipe for hunger. I think the second thing we definitely need to do is recognize that, you know, the World Food Program is actually a very big market. Most people think it's about aid and charity. What happens is governments give money to the World Food Program, but the World Food Program buys grain from Cargill and Conagra and ADM. So they love to dump aid, even when it's not necessary, so that you can destroy local farming, because this food comes for free, and after a while you have farmers not producing food. I'd like to give you just two little pieces of information. You know, I did a study a while ago on women in agriculture for the FAO, and 2% of the land in Nigeria with women's home gardens produces 50% of the food. So one thing for Africa would be, you know, Africa is a very women-run society. You know, they're tough, they're strong. I mean, they've taken Shell to task again and again, is to have more power in the hands of African women, not in Bill Gates' hands. Bill Gates should put his arrogance aside and go and seek guidance from 80-year-old women who have grown food for their families and communities. The second is a very important study that's out now. I call it the IPCC of agriculture. It's the Intergovernmental Study of Agriculture, International Assessment for Agricultural Science and Technology for Development, IAASTD. You can go to their website. They've studied every published paper on agriculture, and they found that neither green revolution nor genetic engineering is producing more food. If we have to have enough food in the world, including in Africa, we have to turn to indigenous knowledge, small-scale farming, and agroecological techniques. That's where increased food production potential lies. So we have to support this report. I was supposed to stop in FAO on my way over. They were trying to suppress this report, even though it's commissioned by them, because it says something other than what they wanted to hear. So we need to talk more about it. We need to distribute the outcome of it more. And just like the IPCC reports could not be crushed by the oil industry, we need to be sure this report celebrating agroecological traditions becomes the common knowledge around the world, so we do not through guilt support GMOs or through fear support GMOs, because a lot of people are supporting GMOs with the scare of climate change. And then now I'm just showing Devon, we've just done this new report on the biopiracy of climate resilient crops. They're just taking our crops, patenting them, and making it look like they genetically engineer drought tolerance. They can't engineer drought tolerance. It's too complex a trait. It's not a single gene trait. So we do need to turn to all those amazing knowledge systems that lie submerged and subjugated, and let them, I think you use the word resurgence, right? You need a resurgence. Yeah. And I think that should be time. Thank you very much.